Hey, how's it going? I started building this castle a while back in my Minecraft world, and then just kinda left it hollow, so today we're gonna work on making it not hollow. Today's scary stories are a little different because they all actually happened, and they're actually pretty terrifying. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. All of the stories I'm reading today are from r/true scary stories, and coincidentally enough, all of the users that posted them are deleted. I went to a serial killer's lair. Hello Redditors. Here's a story I have never told anyone, partly because elements of the story are just not appropriate in most social situations. As a result, I've locked this away in my memory and I rarely think about it. Fair warning, this story does involve some sketchy situations. And as another disclaimer, I'm completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgments into the story, but rest assured that in hindsight, I'm aware of the foolishness that took place, and I don't need to be chided on that topic. Now, where to begin? The year was approximately 1998-1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between, transitional time for gay people, where in most populous areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there were still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at the point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms, hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at that time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously, without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of men. On the other hand, being such a new communication tool for most people, we were sometimes blind to the risks. Being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personal message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and weirdos that you'd expect. I wasn't a player by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay guy at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. At some point during this time, I had had a brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forget his screen name, it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had come of it, but about a week later, I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay, and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this Slim Guy 65 person from this message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you were talking to him, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused, or what? I responded to the email asking for clarification on what exactly happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond, and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about someone gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off work and decided to take to the internet to fish for some guys, as was my custom. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place and hang out and just have a good time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I won't go into details, and as I recall, there weren't really many details discussed other than the small talk and intros we'd done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email I'd received warning about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions and no answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore Slim Guy 65? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area. Not some shack out in the woods, and I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just get the hell out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style house, with one apartment on the ground floor and one of the second floor. Part of a row of identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon. There was plenty of traffic on the street and the occasional person out on their porch or in their backyard. I pulled up the driveway to the parking area behind my house, got out, and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim build, soft-spoken, looked like any guy working in an office cubicle somewhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do. So, I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation, with the warning email fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, no table or chairs or anything. That is to say, it didn't look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and cleaned, but looked empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it wasn't set up as a living space. A large window with sliding glass was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table in the living room area. Slim Guy 65 said something like, "This isn't where I live." A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here. I maintained the building for him. It's private though, we have the place to ourselves. Weird, okay. He shut the back door and locked it, with a keyed deadbolt. The kind you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his keys back in his pocket, saying, "So, what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door has a window, so it even makes sense. Still, something's not right here. I can tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking rather nervous, and his voice was a little wavery and halting. Not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm this guy was up to no good, or at least there was something he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I wasn't a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like, even when I'm at my very thinnest, I still wear size large tops and 36 waist pants. So I look big, which people tend to interpret me as being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a badass thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long, a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door, and that I didn't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment, like he was going to pee his pants, then said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." He unlocked the deadbolt, and I'll just lock the knob here. And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine by me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point though, my adrenaline was flowing. I was almost in full fight or flight mode, but I was kinda stuck in this place. The guy was between me and the door. I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty, and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't know yet exactly what to do. Now keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly, without any really long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 or 2 minutes since I had stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. The guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked in a wide path around me, through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It's very common in this area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms with a bathroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really, now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kinda want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight, so I slowly headed toward the living room. I felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large rectangular stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living room. I remember thinking this looks like a surgical table. It looked like it could rise and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what that was. It was 100% a mortician's table. Dude had a mortician's table in there. But at that time, I thought it looked like a medical table of some sort. There was some other office-type cabinets and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is the table in that room. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. Slim Guy 65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story was true, had one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead and take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see that the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling. The type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 1970s. I slowly took a few steps down to that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a key deadbolt lock, like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much knew the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair, a non-swiveling plastic desk chair with thin metal legs, sitting near the center of the room. The room had an old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows. And I know that room had at least one window, probably 2, so whoever did that paneling went over them. There was also a phone in there, plugged in and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s. Dingy beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines. Just sitting on the carpet near the wall, with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of that room, with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door. I looked back at Dude. He was still standing by that other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the backside of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I didn't see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have been just inside the door, of course, but that original switch was covered up by paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized that I was way too far into this apartment. I was running through options in my head. What is this guy going to do? He doesn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who the hell knows what goes on in this place? What are you trying to do? He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some man-to-man fun?" with the weakest smile I've ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical, but really, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was the way he said it, like he had to come up with something on the fly. Something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? Hey, do you want to have some man-to-man fun? Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy website or something. Some fun. Smile, quivering lips. That was it. I said, "No, I want to go. I'm leaving." He said, okay. I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter. I let myself out of the door and didn't bother closing that, as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that, indeed, there was a window facing the backyard area from that paneled room, but of course, it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door. And I left, heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, oh my gosh, what was that? So, was this guy some kind of killer, or was he just an awkward, closeted gay guy with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy mortuary table and a windowless room that locks from the outside, with a chair and a phone and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room gets locked in. He probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess what happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home, at first, I thought of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But thinking it through, I realized I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I went to meet a guy, and what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at the time, while the local police in this city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved to help the gays. They'd prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I'd heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it, except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it, but back then, not so much. So, live and learn. I drove past that house once in a while in the normal course of life for several years, and I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I went past. Then eventually the blinds were down and there were decorative curtains in the window. So I assumed the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002, maybe 2003, there was a murder of a young man on the news. He'd been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line and out in the country. The case on the news matched up with that MO. My friend told me the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone the night he disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murders apparently was nowhere near that duplex, at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or of any mention of a suspected serial killer, other than some gossip. So, that happened. Yeah, I feel like this was a very nope situation as soon as you walked right in the front door. Yeah, the mortician's table, the room that locks from the outside with no door handle that only has a chair and a phone. The OP was smart to book it out the door. Nothing in this story proves that he's a killer, but the picture that it paints makes it really obvious in my opinion. The next one is titled Not My Mother. So this happened about 11 years ago. I was a senior in high school at the time, but it's the single most mind-boggling thing that I've ever experienced. It's also important to note that it happened in mid-December. I'm from Iowa, and the winters here get cold at night. Like, if you get stuck outside, you will die kinda cold. That plus the snowfall makes everything dead silent. You can hear anything and everything inside the house, and even immediately outside of it. Well, me and my best friend were hanging out in my family's walkout basement, just having a boring winter night playing video games. We were also the only ones home. The reason it was just us is because my mother went from work straight to a bar to grab a few drinks with coworkers. So me and my friend thought it would be a good idea to break into the family's wine and live a little. As we were sitting there opening up the first bottle, I hear the door to the garage open and slam shut. I immediately go, oh shit, and start looking for places to hide the bottle. My friend then says, I thought you said your mom was supposed to be out all night. She was, I replied. I then heard a few heavy stomps and hear my mother yell out, meows and boo, anyone home? I yelled back up the stairs, yup, just hanging out in the basement. I hear a few more steps move from the garage door towards the stairs, and she yells out again, can you come help me with something? I need you up here. I reply back while frantically trying to find a good place to hide the wine bottle. Yep, just give me a minute. Then there was silence for about 20 seconds. Anyone down there with you? She yelled back in a more concerned, serious tone, in a voice that was slightly off of my mother's. This was the first thing that told me something wasn't right. Our family never cared if anyone was over, as our house was a very open house to all family and friends. In the voice, it was just wrong. Like, it sounded like my mother's, but it was missing something that I couldn't put a finger on. Weirded out, I reply back, just Colton. After I yelled that back to her, I found a good place to hide the bottle and began walking up the steps to the next level. Now, as I was walking up the steps, I couldn't help but feel the overbearing silence of the house and the slight electric twinge that something isn't right. When I got to the top of the steps, I look over to where the door to the garage is, and also the kitchen right next to it, and it's black. Pitch black. All of the lights were off, and there was no moonlight shining through any windows. I walked over to the kitchen yelling out, Mom, where are you? There was no reply, just silence and darkness. I feel the electric twinge turn into full needles, and my adrenaline kicking in full force. I have to get out of here as fast as possible. My mother was not home. I run back down the stairs, grabbing my coat along the way. What's wrong? Colton says. My mom's not home, I reply, as fast as I can, looking for my truck keys. What do you mean? You were just talking with her. I could see the confusion in his face. There's no one home. We need to leave now. I took a few steps toward the back door that opens up to the yard, and then I see my dog shaking on the couch and my cat growling behind it. I couldn't leave them. I just knew that if we left, something would happen. Are we leaving? Colton said, still confused as hell. No, I can't leave them here alone. Something is really off. I'm gonna call my mom and figure this out. I pull out my phone and call my mom. She picks up immediately. Meows and boo? What's going on? She answers. Mom, were you just home? I heard you yelling for me from the second level. When I went up, you weren't there. I said frantically, hoping that she was playing a joke. No, I'm just leaving the bar. I wasn't feeling very well. Are you okay? What do you mean you heard me? I fill her in on the whole story and she rushes home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she got home. But before she did, you could hear something upstairs. Not walking or sitting on things, but a pressure in the air, like a black hole was slowly moving from one room to the next. And the word that I would instinctively describe it as is hungry. When she got home, you could feel the thing leave just as quick as it came, like an overbearing predatory presence had just flown away. We still have never figured out what the hell was going on, and this is just one story of many unexplainable things that have happened to us. But this is the easiest to write down, and one that I was happy to have a witness. My mother has passed away now, and I've moved away to Arizona, but whenever I go back to Iowa and I see Colton, he still gets creeped out by what had happened. I'll never truly know what happened, but I know that whatever it was had my mother's voice. It was evil, and it was hungry. Okay, so that was a skinwalker, right? Like a real one? This guy was very lucky. It's a good thing he was paying attention to his surroundings and just, paying attention to that feeling that he had that something wasn't right. Because he ended up being right. Something was not right. I've never had an experience like this, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But if you guys ever feel like you might have met or seen a skinwalker, let me know in the comments because I'm so curious to hear about it. The next one's titled, Help Me, I'm Lost. This is my first post and is a true story. I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10 or 11 at this time. One night, I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent. So I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom's on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice, "Help me, I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead, I barely said, "No," before this thing comes running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open, then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that and never set foot in the house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and it'll come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely a good he who shall not be named situation. I like this comment. I believe you encountered a cryptid called Crawler. They're humanoids that are around 7 feet tall, pale white, with abnormally long arms that can get down on all fours and run, which is why they're called that. They live in caves underground or abandoned places deep in the woods. They're curious and predatory as well. It's also believed that they can imitate human voices, but they sound off, like it's not really human. Yeah, I'm gonna stop thinking about that before it shows up in my nightmares. Anyways, that's all the true scary stories I have for you today. If you guys like this video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, as it does help me out a lot, and I post these videos every day, so subscribe and check out my second channel, Drove In 2. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Peace.